Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. I'm Ashton Foster, 35 years old, a tech millionaire with a fortune that sometimes feels like a dream I can't quite grasp. For $100 million, according to the latest valuation of my company. I live in Seattle, where the drizzle never seems to let up, painting the city in a constant haze. The neon-lit streets hum with life, and the air carries the faint scent of coffee, inescapable in this city. My home, a sleek mansion of glass and steel, sits high on a hill overlooking Puget Sound. Every morning, I wake up to the soft breathing of Adeline, my wife, the woman I love more than life itself, and our 6-month-old son, Nicholas, whose bright summer sky eyes can light up even the gloomiest Seattle day. But beneath the glossy surface, beneath the money, the fame, the extravagant wine-soaked parties, there's a fragility. It's like a veneer, thin and brittle, hiding the cracks that run deep in my heart. Those cracks trace back to family, to my parents, Waylon and Jade Foster. I grew up in a small town a few hours' drive from Seattle, where endless fields of grass stretched beneath a gray sky that seemed to choke out hope. My childhood wasn't the kind you'd see in a feel-good movie. My father, Waylon, was a car mechanic, his hands rough from years of wrenching under hoods. His temper was a storm, unpredictable and fierce. I can still hear his voice, low and growling, as he snapped at me over something small. "Ashton, you clumsy idiot." He'd bark, his face red, when I spilled a glass of water across the kitchen table. I was maybe 10, standing there frozen, watching the water drip onto the floor. "Can't you do anything right?" His hand would come down sometimes, a sharp slap across my cheek that stung worse than the words. Once, when I forgot my math homework, he grabbed my arm so hard it left a bruise. "You think you're smarter than me, boy?" he said, his breath heavy with the faint smell of motor oil and cheap beer. I didn't answer. I learned early that silence was safer. My mother, Jade, was different, but no less cutting. She didn't hit me, but her eyes, cold and sharp as a blade, could slice through me. "Ashton, why can't you just behave?" she'd say, her voice flat, when I'd fidget during dinner or come home with a rip in my jeans. It wasn't anger with her, it was worse. It was disappointment, like I was a mistake she couldn't fix. I remember once, when I was 12, I brought home a drawing I'd made in school, a picture of our house with the fields around it. I thought she'd like it. She glanced at it, her lips thinning. "Don't waste your time on this nonsense," she said, tossing it onto the counter. "You need to focus on something useful." That was her way. No warmth, just a constant reminder that I wasn't enough. We weren't poor, but we weren't well off either. Our life was a cycle of tension, my parents' voices rising in endless arguments that echoed through our small house. "If you'd just listen to me, Waylon," my mother would snap, slamming a dish into the sink. "And if you'd stop nagging, Jade, maybe I could think straight." He'd fire back. I'd sit in my room, door cracked, listening to the shouting, wondering if it was my fault somehow. By the time I was 15, I knew I had to get out. I couldn't become my father, bitter and resentful, his dreams rusted over like the cars he fixed. I couldn't become my mother, always complaining about what she didn't have, her eyes dull with regret. So I poured everything into school. I studied day and night, my desk littered with textbooks and notes, the glow of my lamp burning late into the hours. "You're wasting electricity, Ashton," my mother would mutter when she passed my room, but I didn't care. I aced my classes, earned a scholarship, and when I got accepted to MIT, it felt like I'd finally broken free. "You're leaving?" my father said when I told him, his voice gruff, like he couldn't decide if he was proud or angry. "Think you're too good for us now?" My mother just looked at me, her eyes unreadable. "Don't forget where you came from," she said, and that was it. No hug, no good luck. Just those words, heavy with warning. At MIT, I found my place. Technology, lines of code that could turn ideas into reality, became my obsession. I'd sit in the computer lab, the hum of servers in the background, typing until my fingers ached. "Hey, Ashton, you ever sleep?" my friend Mike would joke, leaning over my shoulder to see my screen. "Not till I make something real," I'd say, half smiling, my eyes fixed on the code. That drive never left me. At 25, I founded my first startup, pouring every ounce of myself into it. At 30, I sold it for $200 million, a number that felt unreal when I saw it in black and white. By 35, my second company, an artificial intelligence platform, was valued in the billions. I became one of America's youngest millionaires, my face splashed across Forbes, my name on guest lists for tech summits, my life unfolding in a house I once thought existed only in dreams. Money doesn't buy everything. I learned that the hard way. It doesn't erase the memories of nights spent curled up in the corner of my room, heart pounding, as my parents' screams tore through the thin walls of our house. "You're useless, Waylon," my mother would shout, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And you're never satisfied, Jade," my father would roar back, followed by the crash of something, a plate, a chair, hitting the floor. Those sounds still haunt me, no matter how many zeros sit in my bank account. Money doesn't heal the wounds in my heart when I think about how they treated me. My father's slaps, my mother's cold, cutting stares. And most of all, it doesn't transform Waylon and Jade Foster into the warm, loving parents I used to pray for as a kid. When I first started making real money, I thought I could fix it all. I thought I could buy their love, or at least their approval. So I went all out. I hired contractors to renovate their old house a few hours from Seattle, turning that cramped, tension-filled place into something spacious and cozy, with new floors, fresh paint, and windows that let in the light. I didn't stop there. I bought them a beachfront villa worth over $10 million, a stunning retreat with lush gardens and an infinity pool that seemed to spill into the deep blue ocean. It was breathtaking, the kind of place you see in magazines. I gifted them a luxury SUV, sleek and powerful, the kind of car my father used to point out in parking lots, saying, "One day, Ashton, I'll have one of those." I covered all their expenses, utilities, health insurance, even lavish vacations my mother loved to brag about to her friends. And every month, I sent them $10,000 for pocket money, no strings attached. It was more than enough for them to live comfortably, extravagantly even. I thought it would make them happy. I thought it would make them see me. But I didn't expect how deep greed could run, like a current pulling everything under. Every time I called, my mother had a new complaint. "Ashton, the TV in the villa's too small," she'd say, her voice dripping with dissatisfaction. "We need one of those big ones, like the celebrities have. Or, why don't we ever go to Hawaii? Everyone's been there, but us." My father was no better. He'd call with some half-formed business idea, always vague, always risky. "Just need a little investment, son," he'd say, his tone casual, like he wasn't asking for another $50,000. "You've got the money, don't you?" I tried to meet their demands, not because I wanted to flaunt my wealth, but because I thought it was my duty. I felt guilty for leaving them behind, for building a life they could never touch, while they stayed stuck in the same small town, the same mediocre existence. I thought giving them everything would ease that guilt, maybe even make us a family. But the more I gave, the more they wanted. My mother's calls started to feel like performances. "Oh, Ashton, you're such a wonderful son," she'd coo, her voice sickeningly sweet, like she'd rehearsed it. "We're so proud of you." My father would pat my shoulder when I visited, his grip a little too firm. "You're the pride of the family, kid," he'd say, but his eyes didn't match his words. They were calculating, scanning me like I was a walking safe, waiting to be cracked open. I didn't want to see it. I told myself they were just adjusting to their new life, that they appreciated me deep down. Adeline saw through it long before I did. With her soft brown hair and those sharp eyes that could read people like an open book, she always had a knack for cutting through the noise. One evening, we were sitting by the fireplace in our Seattle home, the flames casting shadows on the walls. Nicholas was asleep upstairs, and the house was quiet, save for the faint crackle of the fire. Adeline set her wine glass down and looked at me, her expression soft but serious. "Ashton," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I don't think your parents love you because you're their son. I think they love you for your wallet." I laughed, trying to brush it off. "Come on, Addie, that's a bit harsh, don't you think?" I said, forcing a grin. "They're my parents. They're just not great at showing it." She didn't smile back. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "You give them everything, and they just ask for more. That's not love, Ashton. That's something else." Her words hit me like a punch, but I shook my head. "They're family," I said, my voice quieter now. "They're all I've got." "They're not all you've got," she said softly, reaching for my hand. "You have me. You have Nicholas. We're your family now." I squeezed her hand, but I couldn't meet her gaze. Deep down, I knew she was right. I just didn't want to face that truth. Adeline is the guiding light in my life. 7 years ago, I met her at a tech conference in San Francisco. She was a freelance journalist, there to write about the impact of artificial intelligence on society. I was one of the panelists, fielding questions from a packed room, but it was her voice that cut through the noise. Her questions weren't the usual softballs lobbed to flatter a speaker's ego. They were sharp, intelligent, like she was trying to peel back the polished facade I'd spent years perfecting. "Mr. Foster," she said, standing up, her notebook in hand, "your platform promises to revolutionize decision-making. But how do you address the ethical risks of AI amplifying human biases?" I froze for a split second, caught off guard by her directness. The room seemed to hold its breath. I gave some answer, polished, practiced, but all I could think about was talking to her again. After the panel, I found her by the coffee station, scribbling notes. "That was a hell of a question," I said, offering a smile. She looked up, her brown eyes sizing me up. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, but there was a hint of a smile. "Care to grab a coffee and keep the debate going?" I asked, half expecting her to say no. "Only if you're buying," she shot back, and that was it. From that day on, we were inseparable. When Nicholas was born, my life felt complete. That tiny boy, with his chubby hands gripping my finger, was everything I'd ever dreamed of. I'd look into his bright eyes and make a silent vow. He would never know the fear or loneliness that defined my childhood. Adeline and I poured everything into him. Sleepless nights, changing diapers. Early mornings watching him giggle in his crib. Those moments filled our vast, modern Seattle mansion with warmth. His cries and laughter echoed through the glass and steel, turning it into a home. But happiness, I've learned, is fragile, like a candle burning in the wind. And I never expected that wind to blow from the people I called my parents. That Thanksgiving, Adeline convinced me to visit them in the small town where I grew up. I wasn't thrilled about it. The thought of seeing Waylon and Jade again twisted my stomach into knots. But Adeline, ever the voice of reason, sat me down one evening, her hand resting on mine. "Ashton, they're family," she said gently. "No matter what, they're your parents. Nicholas should meet his grandparents." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "You don't know them like I do, Addie. They're complicated." "I know," she said, her eyes soft but firm. "But maybe this can be a fresh start. For Nicholas, at least." I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. I didn't want Nicholas growing up without knowing his grandparents. But facing my parents made me feel like that 10-year-old boy again, cowering in a corner, bracing for the next shout or slap. Still, I agreed. We planned the trip meticulously, packing a suitcase full of toys and diapers for Nicholas. The drive was over 3 hours, winding through fields and forests, the Seattle drizzle giving way to the gray skies of my childhood. The house where I grew up had changed, thanks to my money. It was no longer the rickety wooden place with moss-covered shingles and creaky floors. Now it was a bright, 2-story home, freshly painted, with new furniture and a garden my mother boasted was her masterpiece. But stepping inside, I felt the same chill, as if the walls still held the echoes of old arguments, of my father's growls and my mother's sharp sighs. My mother greeted us at the door, her arms outstretched. "Ashton, my boy," she said, hugging me too tightly, too long, her smile so radiant I couldn't tell if it was genuine. "Look at you, so successful, and still remembering your parents." "Hey, Mom," I said, my voice tight, stepping back. My father was next, clapping my shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. "Good job, son. I'm proud of you," he said, his voice gruff, but his eyes had that familiar glint, like he was sizing me up. "Thanks, Dad," I muttered, glancing at Adeline. She gave a slight shake of her head, her way of saying, "Stay calm, it'll be fine." Nicholas, cradled in her arms, yawned and squirmed, oblivious to the tension. My mother's eyes lit up, and before Adeline could react, she practically snatched him from her. "Oh, my sweet grandson," she cooed, her voice dripping with affection I'd never heard directed at me. "So adorable. Look at that nose, just like his father's." Adeline smiled politely, but I saw her hands tighten around her purse. She was uncomfortable, and so was I. "He's a handful," Adeline said lightly, trying to keep things warm. "Keeps us on our toes." "Oh, I bet he does," my mother said, rocking Nicholas, her eyes fixed on him like he was a prize in a game I didn't understand yet. That evening, we sat down for dinner. My mother had made a traditional stuffed turkey, the table set with dishes I'd paid for, but never seen. "Been preparing this since morning," she said, beaming as she carried the platter out, the golden brown turkey steaming in the center of the table. Dinner dragged on, my father uncorking a bottle of wine I'd brought from Seattle. He poured himself a generous glass and launched into a monologue about his latest investment schemes. "Ashton, you know, if you lent me some money, I could open a bigger auto shop," he said, leaning across the table, his eyes gleaming. "This town needs one. Could be a gold mine." I nodded, my jaw tight. "I'll think about it, Dad," I said, but all I wanted was for the meal to end, for the night to be over so we could pack up and head back to Seattle. My mother chimed in about her garden, my father kept circling back to money, and I just sat there, forcing smiles, my fork pushing food around my plate. That night, Adeline and I lay in the guest room bed, the old mattress creaking under us. Nicholas slept soundly in his crib nearby, his soft breaths a small comfort. But I couldn't sleep. Something felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Was it the way my mother looked at Nicholas, her eyes holding a mix of affection and something else, something I couldn't name? Or was it my father's endless questions about my company, my wealth, my plans? You've got big things ahead, don't you, son? He'd said at dinner, his tone too eager, too probing. I shook my head in the dark, trying to push the thoughts away. They were my parents. Flawed, sure, but family. And family doesn't hurt each other, right? I was wrong. So terribly wrong. I didn't know then that my world was hours away from collapsing, that the fragile candle of my happiness was about to be snuffed out, and that my parents would be the wind that extinguished it. The next morning, Adeline and I woke to the fresh suburban air seeping through the window. I headed downstairs, where my mother was already bustling in the kitchen, pots clanging as she prepared what she called special dishes for lunch. My father was in the living room, newspaper in hand. When he saw me, he folded it quickly and rushed over. "Come on, son," he said, clapping my shoulder with that familiar force. "Let me show you the backyard. Got a little gardening project going." I followed him outside, where he pointed to a few stunted chrysanthemum beds. Barely a project, more like a neglected patch of dirt with some flowers fighting to survive. "Needs a bit of work, but it's coming along," he said, his voice proud. I nodded, barely listening. Upstairs, I could hear Adeline's laughter mingling with Nicholas's happy gurgles as she fed him and played with him. For a moment, the sound washed over me, easing the tension in my chest. It felt like everything might be okay, but that feeling didn't last. As lunchtime approached, my mother came into the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "We're low on a few things for the kitchen," she said, her tone bright. "Why don't you two run to the convenience store? It's only 15 minutes by car." Adeline, who'd just come downstairs with Nicholas in her arms, glanced at me. I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "You two go ahead," my mother added, her voice sweet, almost too sweet. "Leave Nicholas with me." Adeline's grip on Nicholas tightened slightly. "Are you sure, Mom?" she asked, her voice careful. "Nicholas is only 6 months old. He can be fussy." My mother laughed, a loud, dismissive sound. "Oh, don't worry," she said, waving her hand. "I raised Ashton, didn't I? Looking after a baby is no trouble. Go on, you two need some alone time." My father nodded, clapping my shoulder again. "Listen to your mother, Ashton. She's got this." I looked at Adeline, trying to read her thoughts. She gave a slight nod, but I noticed her hand gripping her purse tightly. "All right," she said finally, her voice quiet. "But please, Mom, don't let Nicholas play with small toys. Yesterday, I saw you holding that plastic ring with tiny beads. It's dangerous. Nicholas puts everything in his mouth." My mother laughed again, waving it off like it was nothing. "Don't worry, Adeline. I know," she said. "I'll only let him play with safe toys." Adeline hesitated, her eyes flicking to mine. I gave her a small nod, trying to reassure her, though my own unease was growing. She sighed, placed Nicholas in his crib, and leaned down to kiss his forehead. "Mommy will be back soon, my love," she whispered, her voice barely audible. We left the house and drove to the convenience store in the town center. I tried to savor the rare moment alone with Adeline, just the two of us in the small town's convenience store cafe, but my mind kept drifting back to Nicholas. Something felt wrong, like a knot tightening in my chest. I glanced at Adeline, who was sipping her coffee, her gaze distant, fixed on something beyond the window. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant it to be. She didn't look at me right away. "I don't know, Ashton," she said finally, her fingers tightening around the cup. "Your mom. I'm not sure she's as careful as she claims. I just have a bad feeling." I forced a smile, trying to push down my own unease. "You're worrying too much," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Mom's not perfect, but she wouldn't let anything happen to Nicholas. He's her grandson." Adeline nodded, but her eyes stayed clouded, unconvinced. She stared out the window, absently twisting her coffee cup in her hands. I wanted to believe my own words, to trust that my mother could handle a few minutes with our son, but that nagging feeling wouldn't let go. About 30 minutes later, we bought everything my mother needed, some spices, a bag of flour, a few odds and ends, and were preparing to head back when my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I smiled, expecting her to gush about how cute Nicholas was, maybe tell me he was giggling or napping. I answered, holding the phone to my ear. "Hey, Mom. Ashton, you need to come back now," she said, her voice trembling, panicked. Nicholas, he's not breathing." My heart stopped. I heard Adeline gasp, her coffee cup slipping from her hand and splashing across the floor, brown liquid pooling at her feet. "What did you say?" I shouted into the phone, my voice breaking. "What's wrong with Nicholas? What are you talking about? Come back now." My mother screamed, then the line went dead. I don't clearly remember what happened next. It's a blur, grabbing Adeline's hand, running to the car, fumbling with the keys. All I recall is her crying, gripping my hand so tightly it hurt, her voice shaking as she said, "Ashton, drive. Hurry." The drive back felt endless, though it was only 15 minutes. I floored the gas, speeding past every limit, the world outside the car a streak of gray and green. My mind was blank except for one image. Nicholas, my tiny boy with his summer sky eyes and a smile that melted everything. No, it couldn't be. He couldn't. I couldn't finish the thought. When we burst into the house, my mother was standing in the living room, her face ashen, clutching her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. My father stood beside her, his eyes wild with panic. "Ashton, Adeline," my mother stammered, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what happened. I only left the room for a moment, and when I came back, Nicholas was. I didn't hear the rest. I pushed past her, my legs carrying me to the crib where Nicholas lay, motionless. My little boy, his eyes closed, his skin pale and bluish. I reached out, praying to feel warmth, but his body was cold. "Nicholas!" I screamed, my voice breaking, raw with terror. Adeline collapsed beside me, cradling him, her sobs shaking her entire body. "My baby," she cried, her voice a desperate plea. "Mommy's here. Open your eyes. Please." I don't know how long I shouted, how long I held Nicholas and Adeline in my arms, the three of us locked in that unbearable moment. Time blurred, meaningless. When the police and ambulance arrived, their lights flashing through the windows, they had to pull me away from him. A female paramedic with her hair tied high knelt beside the crib, her hands moving swiftly, starting chest compressions, administering oxygen. Her movements were precise, professional, but I saw the look she exchanged with her colleague, a quick glance, heavy with resignation, holding no promise of hope. Adeline clung to me, her nails digging into my arm as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "They'll save him, right?" Adeline whispered, her voice faltering, as if she already knew the answer. She clung to me, her body trembling. I didn't respond, couldn't find words. I just held her tightly, my eyes fixed on Nicholas, lying so still in his crib, his tiny chest unmoving under the paramedic's hands. After what felt like an eternity but was only minutes, the paramedic with her hair tied high looked up, her face solemn. She shook her head slightly. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice low, steady but heavy. "The child has no signs of life. We did everything we could." Adeline let out a heart-wrenching scream, her legs giving way as she collapsed to the floor. I dropped to my knees beside her, pulling her into my arms, feeling like the world was crumbling around us. Nicholas, my light, my joy was gone. I looked at him, his skin cold, his bright summer sky eyes closed forever, and my heart felt like it was being crushed, squeezed until nothing was left. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only hold Adeline as her sobs shook us both. My mother stood in the corner, hands covering her face, sobbing. "Ashton, I don't know what happened," she repeated, her voice trembling, breaking on every word. My father stood beside her, pale, his hands stuffed in his pockets, muttering, "How did this happen? How?" I barely registered their words. My eyes were on Nicholas, on the paramedics stepping back, their equipment now useless. Then the police arrived, their presence sharp and clinical, cutting through the haze of grief. Two officers sprang into action immediately. One, a tall man with a deep voice, introduced himself. "I'm Officer Harris," he said, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of empathy and professionalism. "I know this is a difficult time, but we need to understand what happened. Please, step back to preserve the scene." I nodded numbly, guiding Adeline to her feet, though she leaned heavily against me, her breaths ragged. "Who found the child?" Officer Harris asked, his pen poised over a notepad. My mother spoke up, her voice choked with tears. I was watching him," she said, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. "I only left the room for a moment to get water, and when I came back, Nicholas wasn't breathing. I tried to shake him, but..." She trailed off, sobbing, her shoulders shaking. I stared at her, searching her eyes for truth, but all I saw was tears and panic. Or was I missing something? A flicker of doubt gnawed at me, but I pushed it down, too overwhelmed to trust my own thoughts. Officer Harris jotted notes quickly, his face unreadable. The second officer, a young woman with a calm demeanor, was photographing the scene. She leaned over the crib, her gloved hands careful, deliberate. Then she paused, picking up something small, a piece of plastic, a fragment of the toy Adeline had warned my mother about. "We found this in the crib," she said, holding it up before placing it in an evidence bag. "This could be the cause." Choking hazard. Adeline, still trembling in my arms, suddenly looked up, her eyes blazing through her tears. "I told her that toy was dangerous," she said, her voice icy, cutting through the room. "I specifically warned her not to let it near Nicholas. Officer Harris glanced at her, his pen pausing briefly as he made another note, but he didn't respond. The air grew tense, thick with unspoken accusations, as if everyone was holding back something. My mother's sobs grew louder, but she didn't defend herself. My father shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us. After the paramedics left, Nicholas's body was taken to the coroner's office for an autopsy. Officer Harris explained, his voice steady but gentle. It's standard procedure for any unexplained infant death, he said. We need to determine the exact cause. It's likely a choking incident, but we have to be certain. You'll be informed of the results as soon as possible. The police stayed another hour, inspecting the house, their footsteps echoing through the rooms that had once felt like a prison to me. They began questioning us and my parents. They asked my mother what she'd done before finding Nicholas unresponsive. They asked Adeline and me about his habits, the toy, any relevant details. I answered mechanically, my mind numb, wanting only to hold Nicholas again. Adeline was different. She answered clearly, but I saw her eyes dart to my mother, sharp as a blade. That night, Adeline and I didn't sleep. We sat in the living room beside Nicholas's empty crib, silent. The pain was a monster gnawing at my heart, bite by bite. Adeline leaned against my shoulder, her body rigid, as if battling an inner storm. My mother tried to comfort us, hugging Adeline and repeating apologies, but I noticed Adeline pull away from her embrace, her eyes filled with suspicion. The next morning, as we packed to leave the town, Adeline pulled me to the backyard where no one could hear her. Her eyes were red, but her voice was firm. Ashton, she whispered, I don't believe this was an accident. Your mother knew that toy was dangerous. I warned her, but she still left it in the crib. Don't you find that strange? I looked at her, wanting to argue, to say her grief was clouding her judgment, but something in her voice, her eyes, stopped me. I glanced at the house where my mother was washing dishes, looking distraught, and my father sat at the table, silently flipping through the newspaper. They looked like grieving grandparents, but my mother's eyes, when she briefly glanced at me through the window, fell off, cold, as if she were wearing a mask. I took Adeline's hand, squeezing it tightly, a spark of doubt igniting in my chest. If you're right, I said, my voice trembling, I swear we'll find the truth for Nicholas. 5 days later, the autopsy results arrived. I received a call from the coroner's office on a rainy morning while sitting in my study, staring at a family photo on my desk. The coroner's voice was cold and procedural. Mr. Foster, he said, the cause of Nicholas's death has been determined as asphyxiation due to choking on a small plastic object from a toy. There were no other abnormal injuries. We've concluded it was an accident. I hung up, feeling as though someone had punched me in the chest. An accident. The word echoed, sharp and meaningless. I wanted to believe it was true, that no one had intentionally harmed my son, but Adeline's words from that day about my mother deliberately leaving the dangerous toy in the crib clung to my mind like a thorn. I stared out the window where rain pattered against the glass and wondered, was my grief clouding my judgment, or was something truly wrong? Nicholas's funeral took place on a gray, dreary day, as if the sky itself were weeping with us. The cemetery was on the outskirts of Seattle, where rows of birch trees stood silently, their leaves falling onto the damp ground. Adeline wore a simple black dress, her swollen eyes hidden behind sunglasses. She gripped my hand tightly, her body trembling as if she were fighting not to collapse. I wasn't faring much better. Standing before the tiny coffin, I couldn't believe that my boy, my joy, was now reduced to a name etched on a headstone. My parents were there, standing a few steps away. My mother sobbed loudly, drawing the attention of those around us. My father was silent, head bowed, hands in his pockets. I wanted to feel their pain, to believe they were as shattered as we were by the loss of their grandson. But every time I looked at my mother, I caught her eyes darting toward us, not with grief, but as if she were observing, assessing. Adeline said nothing, but I knew she felt it too. As the priest read the final prayer, Adeline squeezed my hand and whispered, Ashton, I want to go home. We returned to our hilltop mansion, but it was no longer a home. Gone were Nicholas's laughter and Adeline's lullabies. Only a heavy silence remained, like a lead blanket pressing on my chest. Every night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to picture Nicholas's face, but all I could see was him lying motionless in his crib, eyes closed forever. A few weeks after the funeral, with the pain still raw, my parents unexpectedly showed up at our door. My mother hugged me, tears streaming down her face, her voice choked. Ashton, my boy, your father and I can't bear the thought of you and Adeline suffering alone. We're family. Let us stay with you for a while to help you both through this. My father nodded, clapping my shoulder as always, but this time I noticed his hand trembling slightly. That's right, son, we want to be here for you. Adeline stood behind me, silent. I looked to her, searching for agreement in her eyes, but she only gave a slight nod, her lips pressed tightly together. I knew she didn't want them here, but I didn't have the strength to refuse. The grief of losing Nicholas had drained me, and a part of me, the weak part, the part still yearning for a family, hoped their presence might fill the void. They moved in, bringing a few suitcases of clothes and endless words of comfort. My mother cooked every day. My father tinkered around the house, fixing things that didn't need fixing, like the kitchen cabinet door or a light bulb in the garage. At first, I thought they genuinely wanted to help, but within days, I began noticing strange signs. Adeline was the first to sense something was off. One morning as we sat at breakfast, she pushed her plate of scrambled eggs away, grimacing. "Ashton, I feel so tired. My head's buzzing like I haven't slept enough." I nodded because I felt it too. I tossed and turned every night, even with sleeping pills. My vision blurred, my body felt heavy, as if a dark cloud followed me. "It's probably work stress," I said, trying to convince myself, and Nicholas's loss. But Adeline didn't agree. "No, Ashton, this isn't normal. I've never felt like this before. Don't you see? Ever since your parents arrived, we've been getting worse." She spoke softly, glancing toward the kitchen where my mother was washing dishes, humming an old song. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't deny that my health was deteriorating too. The dizziness, waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. It all started when my parents moved in. I tried to dismiss the suspicion. They were my parents. They'd lost their grandson. They were trying to help. But then a memory flickered, a detail I'd overlooked a few days earlier. I'd overheard my mother on the phone in the living room, her voice low and urgent. I know, but we need more time. I'll handle it." When I walked in, she quickly hung up, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Just an old friend, dear," she said, but her eyes avoided mine. Doubt began to gnaw at me, but I wasn't ready to face it. Not until one morning when everything changed forever. We were driving to an appointment with the therapist, a desperate attempt to cope with Nicholas's loss. Adeline sat beside me, silent, her hands clasped tightly. The winding mountain road stretched ahead, with steep cliffs on one side and lush pine forests on the other. I was telling her about a new project at work, trying to lighten the mood, when suddenly the car jolted. The brakes failed. I pressed the pedal hard, but it went soft, useless. "Ashton!" Adeline screamed, grabbing the door handle. I swerved the steering wheel, trying to keep the car on the road, but it careened toward the edge at terrifying speed. The screech of metal rang out as we hit the guardrail, the car flipping onto its side. My head slammed against the window, pain shooting through me. Adeline screamed, then everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying on a stretcher, the flashing lights of an ambulance cutting through the rain. Adeline sat beside me, her head bandaged, her face covered in scratches. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, though my left leg throbbed as if it were broken. Later, doctors confirmed I had a fractured femur, while Adeline had a mild concussion and some superficial wounds. We were lucky to survive, but as I lay in the hospital bed, looking at Adeline's pale face, I knew this was no random accident. The days that followed were an endless string of pain and suspicion. I was discharged from the hospital with a crutch and a long list of painkillers. Adeline, despite her lingering headaches from the concussion, insisted on caring for me. But both of us knew that our physical wounds weren't the worst of it. The suspicion about my parents, people I once thought, despite their flaws, were still family, was eating away at us every minute. My parents remained in our home, continuing their act of a loving family. My mother prepared lavish meals, constantly asking about my and Adeline's health, while my father lingered in the garage, claiming he wanted to check the replacement car provided by the insurance company after the accident. "Let me handle it, son," he said, patting my shoulder with a smile I no longer trusted. "You rest." But I couldn't rest. Every time I looked into my mother's eyes, I saw that cold gaze, one I'd once convinced myself was just my imagination. Every time my father patted my shoulder, it felt like he was sizing me up, like I was prey being hunted. And our health, Adeline's and mine, kept deteriorating. The dizziness, insomnia, and inexplicable fatigue persisted. I began to wonder, was this really just stress, or something far worse? Suspicion was no longer a small thorn. It was a blazing fire in my chest. I started noticing every detail. The way my mother insisted on cooking for us, the way my father frequently went to the garage to check something. I thought back to the accident, the brakes failing, the steering wheel shaking, and a horrifying possibility flashed in my mind. Had my father tampered with my car? The opportunity came one evening when I struck up a conversation with our neighbor, Mr. John. He was an elderly man, living alone with a state-of-the-art security camera system surrounding his house. "Ashton, I heard about the accident," he said, his voice full of concern. "Are you and Adeline okay? You're lucky to be alive." I nodded, forcing a weak smile. "Thanks, John. Just bad luck, I guess." Then I remembered his cameras pointed directly at our garage. "Hey, John," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Did your cameras catch anything the night before the accident? I mean, around our garage." John raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "Let me check." I hobbled after him, each step with the crutch a challenge, but the adrenaline coursing through me dulled the pain. In John's small living room, we reviewed the security footage. The images were clear. My father opening the hood of my car, leaning over it for over 20 minutes, then walking away as if nothing had happened. My blood rushed to my head, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, or rather, what I was realizing. I grabbed my phone and texted John, my fingers trembling. "Can you send me this video?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, Ashton," John replied quickly, his eyes filled with worry. "You okay? Is something wrong?" I shook my head, not wanting to drag him into this dangerous web we'd uncovered. "Just need to check some things." "Thanks," I typed back, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. When I got home, I didn't tell Adeline right away. I needed time to process what I'd seen. But the suspicion had now hardened into an undeniable truth. My father had tampered with the car, and if Adeline was right, if my mother had deliberately placed that toy in Nicholas's crib, then we were living with monsters. I decided to act quietly, using security software from my company. I installed hidden cameras in the house, in the kitchen, the living room, the garage. I shared the plan with Adeline one night after my parents had gone to bed. "We need proof," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "If they're really trying to hurt us, I won't let them get away with it." Adeline nodded, her eyes resolute. "But we have to be careful, Ashton. If they suspect anything, I don't know what they'll do next." A few days later, the cameras captured something that sent chills down my spine. It was in the kitchen, where my mother was preparing dinner. She pulled a small, unlabeled glass jar from her apron pocket. She glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, then quickly sprinkled a pinch of seasoning from the jar onto mine and Adeline's plates. Her movements were practiced, quick, as if she'd done this many times before. My throat went dry. The dizziness, insomnia, fatigue, it all made sense now. I looked at Adeline, who was watching the footage with me on the laptop. "They're poisoning us," I said, my voice breaking. Tears welled up in my eyes. "This isn't just paranoia or coincidence. They're actually trying to kill us." Adeline covered her mouth, her tears streaming down her face. "Ashton, what do we do now?" I didn't answer right away. All I knew was that the seasoning jar was the key. The next day, while my parents were out, I retrieved the glass jar from the kitchen cabinet. Carefully, I extracted a small sample of the powder inside and took it to a private lab I knew through my company. "I need you to test this," I told the lab manager. "And do it as fast as possible." The days felt like an eternity. When the results finally came back 3 days later, I was overwhelmed. The report confirmed my worst fears. The substance in the jar was a slow-acting poison that caused liver and neurological damage. With prolonged exposure, it was nearly undetectable without specialized testing. I sat in my office, staring at the report. "They'll pay," I whispered silently to myself. "For Nicholas, for everything." The hidden camera footage from the kitchen was burned into my mind. My mother furtively sprinkling poison onto our plates, her movements quick and practiced, as if she'd done this many times before. The video from John's security system captured my father tampering with our car. I watched it over and over, each frame confirming my worst suspicions. All of it, the footage, the toxicology report, the recordings from Jack, the private investigator. These were pieces of a horrifying puzzle. My parents, the people I once called family, had killed my son. And now, they were trying to kill Adeline and me for money, for their insatiable greed. Adeline stood beside me, her hands trembling too, but her eyes were resolute. "Ashton," she said softly but firmly, her voice trembling with emotion, "we can't wait any longer. We have to confront them, for Nicholas." I nodded, every breath painfully slow. "I know," I whispered, "but we need to do this right. We need the law on our side." Without hesitation, I reached out and contacted Linda Smith, the criminal attorney I'd met through a business partner in Seattle. I sent her all the evidence. The videos, the toxicology report, and a recording from Jack, the private investigator, of my mother's phone call where she referred to Nicholas's death as a planned accident. Linda listened carefully on the other end of the line, her voice grave. "Ashton, with what you've got, we can pursue charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted bodily harm, and possibly homicide related to your son's death. But how do you want to handle this? Do you want to confront them directly, or go straight to the police? I hesitated, my mind flooded with images. Nicholas's innocent face, my mother's cold gaze, my father's fake smile. Every instinct pushed me toward direct confrontation. I want to confront them, I said, voice firm. I want to hear them admit it. But I need you there. And the police too. Linda agreed without hesitation, and that evening, we devised a plan. The dinner that night felt impossibly heavy, like a storm about to break. I sat at the head of the table, trying to maintain a calm facade despite the pounding in my chest. My crutch was propped beside me, a small reminder of my vulnerability, but I refused to let it show. My mother brought out a casserole, flashing a sweet, almost innocent smile. "Ashton, Adeline, I made this especially for you too," she said, her voice so gentle it felt contrived, unnatural. Her eyes flicked to me, then to Adeline, with a warmth that didn't quite reach her expression. Across from me, my father sat sipping wine, his eyes flickering over me as if assessing everything. Linda's presence, the police officers, even the room itself. His smile was thin, almost fake, and I could see the flicker of something darker lurking behind it. Just then, Officer Michael arrived, right on time. I introduced him as a work friend and an acquaintance, but I saw my mother stiffen at the sight of his uniform. Her face flickered with a brief pallor, a hint of something unspoken. "Oh, that's unexpected," she said, forcing a nervous laugh. "A police officer?" I forced a smile, trying to sound casual. "Just a friendly dinner, Mom. Sit down." The meal began in awkward silence. Adeline and I barely touched our food, citing a health-related diet. I watched my mother glance at our plates, a flash of irritation crossing her eyes, perhaps realizing we weren't going to be so easily manipulated tonight. Linda kept the conversation light, chatting cheerfully as if everything was normal, but I could feel the tension hanging thick in the air. Michael sat quietly, observing everyone with careful precision, his gaze sharp and unflinching. Then I decided to break the silence. I reached for the remote control I'd connected to my laptop and turned on the dining room TV. The screen flickered to life, and I played the security footage. The grainy images showed my father in the garage, tampering with the car before the accident, his hands moving deliberately over the engine, the hood slightly ajar, his face clearly visible in the dim light. "What did you do to the car that night?" I demanded, my voice rising with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "The brakes didn't work. You knew that, didn't you?" My words echoed through the tense air, unable to contain the fury boiling inside me. My father shot up from his chair with a wild, desperate look in his eyes, crashing to the floor as he struggled to respond. "Ashton, what the hell is going on? Are you accusing your own parents?" His voice was strained, trembling with shock and defiance. His eyes darted nervously around the room, searching for an escape or some way to deny the truth I was laying bare. Linda, calm but razor-sharp, cut through the chaos. "Mr. and Mrs. Foster," she said firmly, "we have evidence of a slow-acting poison in Ashton and Adeline's food. In this video," she pointed to the screen, now showing my mother furtively sprinkling poison from that glass jar, "proves you deliberately poisoned them." My mother suddenly burst into tears, her hands covering her face as uncontrollable sobs racked her body. "Ashton, I didn't want to," she choked out, her voice trembling. "Your father made me do it. He said we needed the money, that we needed it more than anything, that you didn't need all that wealth. I just followed along." Her confession hit me like a knife to the chest. I stared at her, this woman who once sang me lullabies, now admitting she'd harmed her own family. My heart clenched painfully. The woman I'd trusted, who'd sung me to sleep as a child, was now confessing to attempted murder. My father, furious and unrepentant, cut her off with a shout. "You liar. I didn't make you do anything." Without warning, he bolted toward the door, knocking over a chair in his frantic attempt to escape. But Michael was faster. He sprinted after my father, calling for backup over his radio. Within moments, the wail of police sirens echoed outside. My father was pulled roughly into custody, his face a mask of rage and desperation as he was led into the patrol car. His shouts echoed behind him. "You have no right." My mother, broken and sobbing uncontrollably, collapsed into a chair. "Ashton," she choked out through tears, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for Nicholas to die. It was just an accident." Her words, once so convincing in my childhood, now sounded hollow and meaningless. I couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see her broken and pleading, knowing the truth she'd finally admitted. Soon after, Michael and his colleagues handcuffed her and took her away. The weight of justice pressing down on us was undeniable. After discussing with Adeline, we decided to press charges against my parents for murder, poisoning, and attempted bodily harm. The case went to trial 3 months later. The 4-day proceedings gripped Seattle's media attention. Linda, Our lawyer meticulously presented every piece of evidence, every frame of video, every lab result, every whispered word from the recordings. Every detail pointed to a horrifying conspiracy, a web spun by those we once called family. Finally, the judge, a stern woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, rose to deliver her verdict. The courtroom was silent, the tension thick as she pronounced the sentence. On the charges of first-degree murder in the death of Nicholas Foster, the jury finds the defendants, Waylon Foster and Jade Foster, guilty. On the charges of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted bodily harm against Ashton and Adeline Foster, the defendants are guilty. The gavel struck with a cold, final thud. My mother collapsed into tears, her sobs echoing through the courtroom. My father, face twisted with rage, shouted, "You have no right," as police officers quickly moved to cuff him and escort him out. Adeline and I held each other tightly, tears spilling down our faces, not tears of joy, but tears of a brutal, unshakable truth. Justice had been served. But the pain, the loss, those scars would never fully fade. A year had passed since the trial. One quiet, gray afternoon, Adeline and I found ourselves at Nicholas's grave in the outskirts of Seattle. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of fallen leaves, a somber reminder of the changing seasons. The small headstone, engraved with our son's name, Nicholas James Foster, stood quietly amidst the lush green grass. I knelt down slowly, my fingers trembling as I placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums on his grave. My hand brushed lightly over the cold stone, feeling a faint warmth in the inscription, as if Nicholas's spirit was somehow still close. I closed my eyes for a moment, longing to feel his warmth through the coldness of the stone, hoping, somehow, that his innocent presence was still with us, watching over us from wherever he was now. Adeline stood beside me, one hand gently cradling her belly while the other gripped my hand so tightly I could feel her strength and her vulnerability all at once. She was 7 months pregnant with another boy, a new light in our lives, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Despite the darkness that had shadowed us, today we were here for Nicholas, to tell him that we'd never forgotten him. The past year had been a long, arduous journey. The days had been filled with darkness, and there were moments I honestly thought I might not be able to go on. After the trial, when my parents had been sentenced to life in prison, I left the mansion on Puget Hill, the house that once held all our dreams. That house, once filled with laughter and plans, was now a place haunted by painful memories I couldn't escape. We had moved to a smaller home in a coastal town, just an hour's drive from Seattle. It wasn't as grand as the mansion, but it was warm and welcoming. Large windows overlooking the endless ocean and a small garden that Adeline tended to daily. We wanted a fresh start, a place to begin healing, even though the wound of losing Nicholas would never truly close. That pain was a part of us now, woven into our very souls. I severed all contact with my extended family on my parents' side, those relatives who had supported my parents, who called me a traitor during the trial. They had become faded names in my memory, distant echoes of a life I no longer recognized. I realized then that family isn't always about blood. It's about those who love and protect you, those who stand by your side in the darkness. Adeline and I had created a charitable foundation in Nicholas's name, a beacon of hope for families who'd lost young children to accidents or crimes. We organized workshops to raise awareness about child safety, from choosing safe toys to inspecting living environments. Each time I stood before a group of parents, I shared Nicholas's story, not to reopen old wounds, but to remind them that every child deserves protection, that their safety is worth fighting for. Adeline often stood beside me, her eyes shining with determination. She'd talk about the warning signs, like the cold look in my mother's eyes or the small details we'd overlooked. "Trust your instincts," she'd say softly, her voice full of conviction. It was a lesson we'd learned too late, but one that could save others. This foundation wasn't just a way to keep Nicholas's memory alive. It was a lifeline out of the darkness for us. There were days when I woke up feeling like I couldn't breathe, the grief and rage pressing in on me so tightly I thought I might suffocate. But every thank you letter from a family we'd helped, every smile from a child we'd protected, gave me a reason to keep going, an ember of hope flickering in the endless night. Today, I stood at Nicholas's grave as Adeline wore a loose sweater that concealed her rounded belly. The wind was gentle, whispering softly as it carried the scent of fallen leaves. I looked at her and saw the quiet strength in her eyes, hope and love intertwined. She broke the silence softly, her voice filled with tenderness. "Do you think this little one will be like Nicholas?" she asked, her voice gentle but full of hope. I looked at her, seeing the light shining through her words and her gaze. I felt a surge of warmth and certainty inside me. I think so, I said softly. He'll be just as wonderful as his big brother. And we'll protect him, no matter what. I thought of the name we'd chosen for our unborn child, Liam. It's such a simple name, yet it carries a weight of meaning. Strong protector. That's what we wanted him to be. A guardian in a world that had already shown us how cruel and unpredictable life could be. We wanted Liam to grow up in a safe world, free from the shadows that Nicholas had endured. As I placed my hand softly on Adeline's belly, I felt a gentle kick from Liam, and my heart warmed at the tiny reminder of new life growing inside her. I looked at her, and a quiet feeling of hope spread through me. You'll be our new joy, Liam, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. And we'll tell you about your brother, about Nicholas, so you'll know how incredible he was, how much he meant to us. Adeline leaned her head gently on my shoulder, tears streaming down her face, but her lips curled into a small, tender smile. Nicholas is watching us. Ashton, she whispered softly, her voice trembling with emotion. I know he's smiling. I nodded, my throat feeling tight, my eyes blurry with unshed tears. I pictured Nicholas, his eyes bright as a summer sky, somewhere up above, watching over us all. That image stayed with me, a beacon of hope amid the pain. I knew, deep down, that though the ache of losing him would never truly go away, we had to keep living, for him, for Liam, and for ourselves. As we left the cemetery, a rare ray of Seattle sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the path ahead. It felt like a gentle blessing, a sign that even in the darkest times, there was light. I reached out and took Adeline's hand, walking slowly, my crutch now replaced by a small cane. Our lives had forever changed, but I'd learned a bitter lesson. Greed. Greed can destroy even the most sacred bonds. That realization had made me reevaluate everything. I no longer cared for a lavish mansion or Forbes recognition. What truly mattered was us, our family, Liam, Adeline, and Nicholas's memory. That was all I needed. As our car rolled along the winding coastal road, Adeline reached over and turned on an old lullaby, the same one she used to sing to Nicholas. Her voice was soft, resonating in the quiet space inside the car. It was a gentle, familiar melody that carried us back to better days, to the innocence of childhood before shadows fell. In that moment, I felt a spark of hope creeping into my heart. Nicholas would always be a part of us, a guiding light that would forever shine in our lives. And Liam, our new beginning, would be our light, guiding us through the darkness. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.